Good morning, hello. I'd like to attach to the presentation before very directly. So we had been talking about dramatization, we had been talking about the artistic part, and a very strong element that I read into from your questions, that I understood from your questions, was about what's the relation to us humans, and actually what do we see when we look at those apparatuses. So there had been the mentioning of the human aspect in the machine.
We need a wire to plug in.
And thank you. Yeah, slides. Here we go. Now, the core of what I'm talking about sounds pretty academic and rather brittle. So I'm going to talking about developments in technology and their influences on culture at a very specific time in history. But I do this in order to extract and bring out aspects of the questions that had been stated by you, and that had been, this is also the reason why we leave the whole situation here, so that you can bring what I'm actually paraphrasing with situations some 200 years ago, and I'm going to stretch that deep into the past, onto this machinery that we work with nowadays. I'm constructing, I did construct a cross-cultural narrative between Europe and mid-Europe and Japan, and by that learned a lot about the relation of technology and culture, and I bring this into the work of my research groups. We call each other HOUSE, which is an acronym, as you read below, Humanoids in Architecture and Urban Spaces. We are a transdisciplinary research group coming from AI research, architecture, automation technology, of course, human-robot interaction. We are in the media arts and philosophy, very important, as our thinking is very strongly, or our artistic work is strongly driven by theoretical and philosophical thinking. I plan to talk some 35 minutes to leave space of about 10 minutes for questions and discussions, so I'm very open afterwards talking with you. Now, my talk is Ningyō and Automata, artificial intelligence, artificial agents in disguise. Now, what are artificial agents? This is, sorry, PowerPoint is jumping. Artificial agents is today's intelligent technology. So it's an umbrella term, and this term might change. So in 5 years, probably we do not talk anymore about artificial agents. Probably not in the sense of how I define it now, as the whole situation is very rapidly changing. But it's a combination of pure artificial intelligence systems, so systems where you have no possibility to see anything at all. It's processes, it happens in wires and in processors, in sensors, dispersed upon networks, upon huge infrastructures. Usually, artificial intelligence is not visible. Totally on the contrary is with robotics. Of course, they are in space, they are in 3D material space with us, and their motion, obviously, very obviously, has to do something with what we do in space, how we are expressing and working in spaces. Everything about these situations, and I give you just a few examples here of artificial agents, just to make sure the lady on the left side is, of course, an avatar, just to make sure. So this is a synthetic person, as it is also called in other contexts. So all this seems to be totally new, on the spot of time. And what I want to show you is that, on the contrary, these technologies stretch back very far. And I want to show this by pulling out the sense and the meaning of certain types of artificial agents. And the disguise, a very important aspect of staging, of showing what those kinds of machineries, so agents, so agent is not machinery. I come to this in a moment. Now what you see here is, in history it's called the very first robot, had been called LC. You see LC is an acronym for light sensitive. And the interesting thing with this is, from the very beginning on, this neurobiologist and later cybernetician Gray Walter came with a description, came with something that went above the idea of the automaton that is there. And this is the turtle. So in the middle you see the very first, let's call it a modern robot, in the sense of modern in the sense of electromechanical workings, and it had been depicted or given shape and identity by means of a turtle shell. So we have already this combination. There's the very abstract machine, as you see in an image of the time, and in the middle, something that is still abstract, but it allows us to hook our experiences. It allows us to let our projections, the things that we, with our consciousnesses, are waiting to see in the world, looking back at us. Now we project the turtle because somebody says turtle to this object, and henceforth we see the turtle. We do see robotic arms here because they are called arms. Try to replace the word arm with snake. Try to replace it with branch. So there are a lot of possibilities to talk about these objects. Arm is just one. And we are used to project arm onto this. So this is how language and understanding and culture that drives the language goes together in order to make us aware and understand things. But there is no arm. The arm is in my head. There's not out there. I interpret this as an arm as I interpret this as a turtle. This is not a turtle. It's a turtle in my head. I do the turtle. It's not there. So this is a very important aspect of what I have to say here in my talk. This is a machine that I'm showing you, and this is obviously an agent. And at the same time, in 1948, another very important step had been done in the development of these kinds of technologies. And this is, of course, Norbert Wiener's book on cybernetics. So this changed everything. In 1948, same year with LC, Wiener came up with a very new breed of mathematics that he had been developing in the years before, during the World War. And this changed many, many sciences from the core and produced new sciences, for example, informatics. At this time, nobody would have talked about informatics. It just didn't exist. Wiener turned it to this. And just 5 years before those, and there's nothing to show because it's totally abstract and mathematical, 5 years before this machine and 5 years before the book, in 1943, a very important paper came out by Pitts and McCulloch. And here we are totally with artificial intelligence systems. What they did was, these two men did, was finding a possibility to formalize the workings of our neurons into a logical calculus. And this was a total break what they did, and now this is very important for your understanding of AI systems, of nowadays AI systems. It's always claimed that those AI systems would work like our brains. This is not true. This is a massive exaggeration. And what McCulloch and Pitts did in 1943 was reducing the idea of how a neuron works to a very reductionist method that then allowed to be calculated within logics. And what they left out, and this is, as I said, for the understanding of artificial intelligence important, and why, if this would be an intelligence, we don't know. We are intelligent, animals are intelligent. We had the dog Rita here, intelligent being. I doubt that there is intelligence, and there is for sure no intelligence in the biological way. And this had been made possible in reducing the workings of neurons to 0 and 1. They never work with thresholds of 0 and 1. This is totally artificial. That's the artificial part, for example. They left out the whole chemistry part of how such a brain works and the combination of electricity and chemistry, so the whole electrochemical part. So these aspects make brains and biological beings very complex and very hard to understand. They left it out, and this allowed for calculation, and hence, voila, we had artificial intelligence. Now, some 80 years ago. But what had happened, and I'm going to show you artificial intelligence systems that are way older than just 80 years. What they did with this take, and this was, of course, a very intelligent move, they allowed with this scientific work for the industrialization of an idea that is many, many centuries old, if not millennia, and this is the body-mind dualism. The idea that a biological being, especially a human, probably it's only a human because probably only we have souls, at least in the spiritual understanding of the Renaissance and Baroque times, we are made up from two substances. This is the idea behind. And this is René Descartes, the philosopher. He famously declared, and I quote, "Minds and bodies are distinct kinds of substances. Bodies," he said, "are spatially extended substances incapable of feeling." I repeat, bodies are incapable of feeling in this basic European understanding. Incapable of feeling and thought, because feeling and thought for this idea is very close together. Minds, in the contrast, are unextended thinking and feeling substances. Now, this is the very basis of our understanding how bodies work. And this is why we project here, of course, intelligence. We see a moving body, and we cannot do different, but projecting that. And this is philosophy. This is not anthropology. This is not how we humans basically work. And of course, what Descartes did was an interpretation of what at the time had been understood of the working of the human consciousness in the context of the Catholicism of his time. This is very important to understand. Now, this concept of dualism of body and mind that we have in the robots as machinery, and in the robots as control system, AI systems that control these robots. So this dualism is critical for my whole talk and for my arguments. Now, in this guise, so, oops, sorry, the PowerPoint is jumping and it cannot be controlled. And this without artificial intelligence. Now, we project, as I pointed out before, and we cannot do differently. And this is a very powerful force. And as this is more or less a group of artists here, I'm stressing the aspect of human fantasy and phantasms. This projection power that I had been talking about, this a possibility of analyzing via synthesizing things that our consciousness can do. This is a powerful core, probably the powerful core of creativity and hence the basis for art at all. Now, what you see here, disguised, of course, is machinery. Machinery, this is Baroque. Does one see my cursor? Yes. So here you see the rider from the front and from the back. It's opened in order to make the cogs and gears visible. Of course, as you most likely know, this is a European automata, late Baroque times, and the beginning of one of the many beginnings of robotics. And this is in Europe. Here, on the other hand side, you see a situation on stage in the Bunraku Theater. You have the same artificial agent idea here, like in the European way, but the deception works totally different. Here, the deception in the European way is something is wild within, so disguised in the machine itself. And when you see the machine from the outside, you get these ideas. You get these ideas, what could be on the inside. You start to interpret, and you are open to all kinds of interpretations. The same is true with the machinery here. You see the robots partly opened, the covers turned loose in order to allow for this case, in order to give you the idea and show you on the comparison. So late Baroque and nowadays. It's the same idea of staging and whiling. This had not changed. Now I move to the Japanese idea. Here in Japan, the idea goes very different. So again, there is the artificial agent, but the way the artificial agent moves is produced by puppeteers. In this case, it's two puppeteers who are producing the motion for this very puppet in the center. And the interesting thing here, totally on the contrary to the European idea, is that you, in Japan, you make very clearly visible how the artificial agent comes to be animated as compared to the European idea. The artificial agent here is obviously animated by whomever, we get no idea. The faces are wild. They are drawn to the background of the stage in a certain sense with their black robes, and the face is covered, but still they are not vanishing. They had been made or left accessible to the audience gaze, to the audience understanding. And why do cultures express and understand the relations to phantasms, to the whiling aspect, to the hiding aspect so differently? What's the background here? And this is one of the conundrums I want to open up here. It goes back very, very far back in history, and as I said, and we have with this projection idea, we do something very special with these artificial agents. We allow them not only to be a surface for our projections, but moreover, we animate them by projecting onto them. And what we animate there is what we don't know, or this what we cannot know and want to have a certain idea about. This might be the stranger, whatever the stranger means in the context of a certain culture, of a certain tribe, of a certain group and a certain culture. This goes back, of course, very far to in human history, and we have a very interesting finding that had been done not so far away from here in Brno, in Brünn is the German word because I'm sure I mispronounced it, where one found a 26,000-year-old carving of a mammoth tooth ivory piece, and this turned out to be, after renovation, the very oldest puppet that had been found so far. So our idea to animate by means of motion and to animate something like bodies like the ones we see here goes back at least to the early Stone Age, and we have no idea how far back these streets. And the interesting thing is this 26,000-year-old puppet had been movable limbs. This is why it had been called the very first puppet so far in human history. Now, the historically situatedness, now I'm coming, so this was more or less the preface, now I'm coming to the more direct comparison between the two cultures. I had been carving out very different approaches to animate and very different approaches to machinery and to the understanding what the control of machinery means, how this can be conceived, made wild, hidden, and very open to be used as a deception, and on the other hand side, open, visible, and still, of course, also this transparent way of control, as we as Europeans would like understand it, of course, is equally open to vile and decept and hide. And these are utterly important means of artistic creativity and the work with technologies. Sorry. It all happened in Japan and Europe at a certain time, is the so-called Zokoku. This is the time when Japan decided to be enclosed. This was a time on the transition, as you see, between the 70s and 80s, 18th century. At that time, interestingly, both Japan and mid-Europe developed a fancy, a deep interest on animating these puppets, Ningyō as they are called, or another kind of puppet, Automata, as they had been called. And interestingly, independent. There could not have been much of an exchange between the cultures because Japan was secluded. Japanese people were not allowed to leave the country totally, and foreigners were very restricted and only to the island of Nagasaki to be on Japanese ground. And the exchange between the Europeans and the Japanese had been harshly restricted by the government and harshly controlled. So here you see a situation with the island, the enclosed fortress where the Europeans had to stay. Here you see Japanese ships, and behind a place where trading was allowed to take place between the two cultures. This was it, very, very secluded. But a lot of exchange had been happening here, and of course also intellectual change. And I give you a very swift idea. So what the Japanese and the Europeans did in mutual understanding with all the problems that they had. Yeah, here below, you might see my cursor. So on the right-hand side, I'm sorry, this is PowerPoint, cannot be repaired. You see the situation, of course, idealized of exchange between the two cultures. And on the left-hand side, you see a book from Europe. So Europe was very much interested in what is behind the veil, what is secluded, what do the Japanese hide with their rejection of foreign cultures, with their rejection of foreign people. So this was much on the literature that had been produced in Europe on Japan. So and this is a very source of the exotism that we still nowadays have with Asian cultures. With the Japanese cultures, many aspects had been interesting, foremost anatomy and medicine in a very medicine in a very new way for the Japanese understanding that enriched the original ideas of Japan. And one tiny detail I want to point out is this. You see this book from 1799, Strange Stories from the West, and here, second, Medical Warnings from the Far West. I was puzzled when I read about the Far West in 1822. The book had been done because in my personal and very restricted European perspective, I always had been thinking about the Far East. Never about the gaze from the other direction, never about the perspective onto me and us as Europeans. So we are still the Far West for this. So there is still a strong difference in those cultures. Now, closer to the Ningyō. Here you see a contemporary depiction of the Bunraku play. In Japan at the time. So here we are with the Ningyō. Now, there had been a very old artistic form of theater plays with puppet in Japan starting already in the 9th century as a distinct art. What you see here is, of course, several centuries later, and in the Japanese development of arts, we see that first the puppet play had been added with shamisen playing over the centuries, and then later on, a very important aspect had been added, and these were verbal narrations. So the stories you see here, more in the center, you see the puppeteers with puppets. Mainly you see 1 or 2 puppeteers with 1 puppet. This had been developing over time. And on the right-hand side, you see a person totally on the edge, looking at a blackboard. So this is the so-called taiyu, a person who would do the narration to the audience, very exaggerated, enormously expressive, guiding the story, and there's a constant move between what is happening on the puppet stage, the main stage, that is in front of the audience, as compared to a side stage that would be the lighted wall here in our situation, where the taiyu, where the narrator would sit, and where the shamisen player, up to 3 shamisen players, would sit and make music. So you as the audience, you would be like in a kind of an angle of stages, and both of the stages would turn towards you with different media. So a very original idea, and this kind of puppet play and the Bunraku theater has no comparison in any other culture of the world. Now, the original puppet plays in Japan, the so-called Ningyō Yoruri, and please excuse my bad Japanese, actually I'm not capable in speaking Japanese, but I try, is that at the time we are talking about, these plays, as you see them here, had been upgraded enormously up to a level that had then been kept until now. The Bunraku, as compared to the typical puppet play of the Ningyō Yoruri, is on the level of the European opera. So this is not puppets as we are more used for children or for certain purposes, but a very high cultural take on expression, on art, and highly formalized. And both the high cultural Bunraku and the common cultural Ningyō Yoruri exist in Japan till today. Now, what is the difference here? The puppets are very different. You see on the right-hand side somebody playing a puppet from behind with 2 sticks. So this is the Ningyō Yoruri. The puppets are way smaller. Still, the puppeteer is drawn back as you have it in the bunraku, in the high cultural form, but the scale is obviously very different. This is other in the bunraku. The bunraku puppets are huge. They are about 2/3 of a human person size. They weigh up to 40 kilos. A warrior puppet could easily weigh 40 kilos, and consider having 40 kilos in motion. This is why they came up with the idea of having 3 puppeteers operating 1 puppet. I do not go into details how this is happening, but this is enormously interesting, how the animation, how the movement of the puppeteers as a kind of or condition for the puppet's movement produce the motion of the puppet. And actually, this was my entry to bunraku. At the beginning, I do not understand the language. The music is for European ears, well, let's call it polite, demanding. You do not understand what their problems are, because these are Japanese problems 200 years ago. But the motion, how humans animate a puppet up to a degree that is usually called lifelike, was very, very intriguing. And then I found out that, and this is the crucial detail for the high cultural bunraku, is that the main characters of this puppet has been equipped with fancy mechanics inside the puppet in order to animate the faces. For example, a warrior puppet could move the eyebrows, and when a warrior would laugh at you, so the eyebrows would move, or when the warrior looks at you shortly before it fight, the eyebrows would go in. So rather clear expressions that are mainly in the face, and they are driven from the inside with mechanics made from rods and sticks, of course, according to the time. Or a female puppet, for example, would be that there is the Gabu character, which is a beautiful young lady, but she is at the same time secluded, hide demon. And what the puppeteers could do with just one motion of the thumb inside the head of the puppet, turn the whole head of a beautiful young lady, please don't project it onto me, it doesn't work, into a demon. So the half of the head would flip back, and you would have a big mouth with enormous teeth, very dangerous demon. So this is what they could do with the puppets. And this was, for the time, enormously. And bunraku puppet was, for nearly 80 years, the primarily art form at this time in Japan. This is also, I guess, very interesting that puppetry had for several generations, smarting out all the other theater forms in a certain culture. Now, automata. At the same time, in Europe, we find this. There are several of the so-called, sorry, this is not funny that it always jumps. Jacques de Vaucasson was the first very important of this automata builder. And you see on the left-hand side a contemporary depiction of his very first automata. Now, for the students in the audience, this is an important message. Vaucasson was a student of medicine. What he was very much interested in had been producing models of living of parts of the human body. He was very much interested in breathing and wanted to build a working model of the breathing process. But he was too poor. He couldn't raise the money. And so he came up with the idea to build automata. So with his knowledge on building, he built automata in order to entertain people, to raise money for his scientific research. And hell, he was successful. So in just 2 years, he built this automata, a bucolic scene, and as you see, 2 humans, and interestingly, in the middle, as probably the most important, there's a duck. So what's up with this duck? Well, at the time, you could show all kinds of medical, anatomical things with humans, but not the act of digestion and, of course, not the act of excretion. And this is what the duck is for. You can feed the duck with grains, and it really would digest those grains and excrete it. This was of absolute highest entertainment for the nobility of the time, and they paid Vaucanson very good. And Vaucanson's work then turned out to be the very start of the Industrial Revolution in Europe, as his work, based on these automata, was the technological ideas for the mechanical loom. And he not only invented it, introduced it, got rich, famous, and voila, the Industrial Revolution would start. Pierre-Jacques Droz, very important next builder, he was capable in building a robot that could blow a flute really with his lips. This is something that would today, with our means of bionic research, a very complicated task. And he mastered the task even before rubber had been invented. So it's close to a miracle what he did in technological times at the day. And he's interesting because he not only built beings, but also a whole environment, so a whole space that had been mechanized and animated. But unfortunately, it had been destroyed, and there are no traces left. We only have written statements on that. Now, I'm come to a Austrian automaton builder that turned out to become very important in the end, Wolfgang von Kempelen. He was a diplomat at the court of Maria Theresia, the empress, the Baroque empress. And he made a bet with his empress on certain machinery. There had been somebody at the court that Champellier, not so important for us, a physician, and he had been doing experiments with magnetism that impressed the Austrian empress a lot. And she was asking Kempelen about his idea on what with magnetism, and Kempelen was like, that's not really interesting. This is like very cheap thing. I could do way more complicated things. He declared boldly, I could build you a chess machine. And probably he did not think that it would turn out, but Maria Theresia said, okay, yes, I give you a holiday of 6 months and you build me a chess machine. Well, he drew back. At the beginning, obviously, you read it in his diary, he had been thinking that he could master a chess machine, but after 2 months he found out that he would never end up with something playing chess on its own. And what he came up with was a deception, a wiling that turned out to be a standard for how artificial intelligence works, how artificial agents work, as he had to cope with his challenge, with the cultural pressure, of course with his personal position, and he wanted to be smart, and he wanted to succeed. And after 6 months, he presented what you see in the middle. This is a reconstruction that you find in the Vienna Technical Museum of the automaton. So you have a puppet sitting behind the desk, very close to the situation that we have here. And the puppet would move the chess figures which are not shown in this image. One could open the cupboard in order to show there is all kinds of very complicated machinery behind. Well, very early people started to suspect that it could be that there's not only machinery but also human intervention somehow involved, but they never found it out. Well, it turned out that for 68 years, in the end, this automaton toured Europe and later the United States. It got sold in the end to the Philadelphia Museum years after Campbell's death. The secret had been kept over several people who had been owning this automaton. But there had been speculations about that this actually is a fake. And famously, Edgar Allan Poe wrote about it, and he had 17 ideas and objections on it can't be. But still it worked, another 20 years after Poe had been writing about it. And only then a witness of eye saw then a chess master climbing out of the machine, reported it in media, and the whole fraud then was opened. But again, 68 years after the machine had been built. Now, this opens up, and this is precisely the socio-technical complexity of this automaton, and this is why it is an example for artificial intelligence and for robotics up till now. Well, it had been disguised, and unfortunately the automaton got lost because this Philadelphia Museum burned down. But we have, as you see, illustrations, and Campbell wrote extensively about this machine, how he built it, of course, without opening his secret. But we have very good ideas how the whole thing worked. Well, those machines, the puppets, the automata, they had been interpreted, of course, intensively in both cultures. And here you see a take of interpretation from the Japanese side. I do not go into details. This had been a public encyclopedia of the time, an encyclopedia that would have been in use for nearly 100 years in Japan and be read by very, very many people. And here in this encyclopedia, you find a mentioning of a certain kind of being, which was an invention of Japanese mythology and folklore, which is the Ikiru. The Ikiru is a figure that has a lot to do with the expression of emotion in the Japanese culture. The Ikiru is something, you can somehow imagine an Ikiru like when you are very exaggerated, either you are enormously in love or you are totally enraged, like losing your mind up to the emotion that captures you and that takes over your body. Then an Ikiru might be produced in splitting your mind, your spirit away from your body and isolating the spirit, and then the spirit would do what the spirit is after. And this is often dangerous for the ones confronted with. In Europe, we have a writer, Jean-Paul, and he had been analyzing the automaton of Campbell. He had no idea about the fake. He still, at his time, so as long as he lived, the fraud had not been unveiled, and he had to believe that it works. And he starts to speculate, like many of his contemporaries, that there must be more than just machinery in order to make this automaton work. And he formulates this, and he produces with this an idea that is somehow comparable to the Ikiru in Japan, despite having European characteristics, and he called it the doppelganger. And the doppelganger idea, you might have heard that already many times. The doppelganger idea turned out to be very important for whole period of Romanticism in Europe, for the literature of Romanticism. It entered Hollywood, produced lots of dark noir films. It entered science and influenced the production or the establishment of modern psychology. And among many of these developments for Sigmund Freud, in his establishment of psychoanalysis, the doppelganger is a very important figure to understand. So we have, in Europe, we have the doppelganger. In Japan, we have the Ikiru, in order to give us an idea about this otherness, about this more than just materiality, more than just interrelation of material parts. In Europe, do I have till 12 or shorter? Oh my God. Okay, okay. Then let me make a very swift and rapid end. Now we pulled out here. You again, doppelganger. We pulled out for, as I mentioned, for my research group, all kinds of aspects of this thinking. We produced an AI system, the Dancer tool, that works totally different to all the industry AIs. It's not a machine learning or deep learning system, and it works very differently. It does not consume enormous data and hence not consume enormous energy powers, does not involve social problems like the machine learning involves it. I give you a very swift idea.
We had to translate the movements of the dancer's body into the motions of the robot's body. Dancers' movements are tracked by a sensor system. We developed an algorithm that describes the positions of human body parts by angles in space to control the robot's body parts. It enables the immediate
So now you see the robot partly imitating the dancer and partly having own AI-driven motion. We call our AI the Impro AI. And here you see...
Our approach to AI was driven by claims in contemporary dance aesthetics. Movement without any explicit beginning or end, center of gravity may shift, body parts may follow different temporal sequences, and the dance...
And here the AI in a performative setting. Now...
Hingabe, the intelligence extraction machine.
And this is a performance...
AI ist nicht bloß Weltauffassung, sondern Weltgestaltung.
Planning ist Beziehung. We are training machines.
You see the control, the actor behind is controlling the robots by means of motion. The robot is the interface between the actor and the dancer sitting, reacting to the motion that in real time goes to the robot.
Hand kann zur Faust ballen. Eine flache Schale formen und andere aus ihr trinken lassen.
And the final scene, the robot driven by the AI, people and dancers disperse.
The bodies train, adapt, perform.
And this is it. So thank you, and sorry for stretching.